Thank you for joining us today. I am Paul Murphy, the board chair of the Community Foundation of Western Massachusetts. My job is to welcome you and to provide some context for today's forum. But first, some Zoom etiquette that you've heard over and over and over again over the last year or so. You will be on mute, but we'll have an opportunity to ask questions later. The program is being recorded, as you saw, I think, a banner go across your screen. Now, for the context. In the spring of 2020, the Community Foundation established a COVID-19 response fund to help to address the needs of our community created by the pandemic. When we spoke to community leaders and organizations to help us to identify these needs, we kept running into a common theme, which was digital equity. So we reached out to Dr. Frank Robinson, who was deeply involved with this issue in its capacity as Bay State Health Vice President for Community Health. Around a year ago, Dr. Robinson led a community conversation on digital equity over the course of 3 Zoom meetings. Now, ironically, the first meeting had to be adjourned due to technology issues, which tells you something about the world that we were living in. But these conversations gave momentum to the formation of the Alliance for Digital Equity, which consists of organizations and individuals who are committed to addressing digital inequity in our community. The assessment report that is being discussed today is a byproduct of the efforts of this alliance. So now I want to acknowledge those who made this report possible. You can put the slide up for, there you go, great, thank you. So as you can see, it takes a village. The key funders for this project were Bay State Health and the Community Foundation. The report itself was designed by transit authority figures, and a special shout out for Focus Springfield for their technical support for this forum. But as you can see from the slide, there are lots of others who were involved and are involved in this effort. And a hearty thanks to all of them. So if you could go to the next slide in the deck. At the end of today's meeting, there will be several Act Now breakout rooms to discuss specific topics and for you to share new ideas. We encourage you to join one of these breakout rooms since we need your ideas and experience. That's the value of bringing people together. We also encourage you to join us. So take a look at these different topics. We'll show them to you again later on, see if there's any that are particularly interesting to you. I like number 5 because we're interested in new ideas also. So we hope you will participate. We also will encourage you to join us for a continuation of this forum, which will be held on September 29th. With the information that we have so far and the additional information we'll gather from you today and over the summer, we'll really be able to move into even more into action mode on September 29th. So now that we're all back together, I will turn it over to Dr. Frank Robinson.
So it's only been 18 months of doing this, and so get where the mute button is on a routine and regular basis. I suspect I'm not the only one out here that does that. So let me start over again. Good morning, welcome. As Paul noted, we are literally 1 year later from a set of conversations around what began as a conversation about the digital divide that actually moved to a conversation about digital equity and inclusion. And so there's a bit of an evolution in terms of how we've seen the problem. I also want to suggest that we're stepping into a new evolution that we'll be asking you throughout this program to consider some questions. And one question is this a question about human rights, civil rights, and digital equity inclusion. And so is access to an internet and access and full utilization of digital tools and services we want to perhaps begin to think about that as a human right or civil right? So let me give you a couple of prepared comments. And in moving to prepared comments, I want to do some level setting. So over the course of this year, and as you will note in the assessment report, there's a set of definitions. And so I want to put them up there so that we begin our conversation today with some level setting and some context. I'm not going to read it to you, but the divide is defined there in a way that identifies it is pervasive in the sense that it cuts across all aspects of life and society. So hold on to that definition, folks. In our shift now in conversation is we can actually spend time in a deficit, but actually we really want to set a destination. Where do we want to go? We want to go to a point where all people have access, are included, and there's digital equity. And so if we think of the notion of equity-centered initiatives, closing the gap, creating supports and resources for those that are without full access, the digital equity sets a destination for us that is more progressive than closing divides. We actually have a destination that creates equity. And so think of that digital equity as a reframe of the conversation moving forward. Next slide, please. So there are two main findings that sort of reverberated for us throughout the assessment process and throughout our conversations. And the findings are right there. It really speaks to the fact that not all folks have full access, and those that start somewhat behind the curve without access, depending on circumstance, such as a pandemic, are impacted more, both by not having access, but also by other circumstances that digital connectivity is supposed to address. So again, hold on to that. You will hear that theme throughout the conversation this morning. Next slide. And so here was our way of testing whether or not our main findings actually met the observations and perceptions of you, the audience. And so some of you, many of you participated in a word cloud, and we wanted to get a sense of how you saw issues related to digital equity. And does it align with those two main points that you just heard about? And will there be alignment later on as you hear from our panelists and as we talk about this issue? So again, we may get another look at this word cloud a little bit later, just as a refresh, but this was our additional assessment to provide additional information and upgrade to our basic assessment report. So I am going to take that down, and I'm going to just give you some introductory comments around the reframe that I suggested earlier, that we're moving towards a civil rights or human rights framework. And again, that's saying an awful lot. So let me see if I can sort of set that up and provide that as an opportunity for you to consider throughout this morning. So at least for the past 18 months, we've all been on this journey. We recognize that we've been working under pandemic constraints, and that having a broadband connection and good digital services and tools were fundamental determinants of my health and your health and our overall community's health and well-being. So without that connectivity, we start somewhat behind. We start behind. And so your ability or my ability, I would say, to use the internet was essential to how well I was able to participate in society, access healthcare, obtain education, my participation in on the job, how I operated on work, or worked toward building my career was critically determined by my access. So now I'm going to ask you to do a little, so I want you to own that kind of experience. I suspect many online can sort of relate to that, but I want you to step into a new role, do a little bit of a role reversal, adopt the position of people without access to the internet, or those that enjoy very limited access. And then imagine the constraints on your ability to cope because of that limited access. So if we sort of adopt that role, everybody sort of step into that. And so let's even be more particular. So for many Black, Indigenous, other people of color, under-resourced and underserved rural communities, the digital divide amounted to what I call the double whammy. So if you think of a double whammy, a situation that is bad in two different ways. A situation in which two bad conditions exist at the same time, or two bad things happen one after another. Again, that's right out of the dictionary, the double whammy. So let's talk about the first set of conditions. So there were people that were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And those are the groups that I referenced. They were historically neglected by existing care programs. And that's noted by clear evidence of health disparities and poor health outcomes. And you can think of those groups presented earlier, premature mortality as poor health outcome. First set of conditions. Second set of condition was that most of those groups were on the wrong side of the digital divide. In this technologically driven response to the pandemic. So the digital response to the pandemic was critical to doing things like getting information on how to avoid infections, what to do if infected, how to access vaccines via various digital platforms, and so on and so on and so on. So the double whammy, if I'm already at risk, if I'm already have a disproportionate share of health inequities, I now have the second set of conditions. I'm disconnected to what's now a technologically driven response to the pandemic because I'm locked in. So the double whammy. So the digital divide, our main point mentioned earlier, causes people who are already impacted, living with inequities, to be impacted more. And so again, that's one of the main takeaways. So let me call the question again. Is this new social determinant of health, or more accurately, this human right, is it a question? And the question is, do we have a right to access the internet? And if so, what does that right look like? And how far does it extend? Underscore the notion of a right to access, and how far does that right extend? And is there a right to access the internet where there is an obligation for our government being Boston and Washington, to overcome the digital divide? Is there an obligation for the state to provide some response? So I'd ask us to sort of hold on to that question today. Again, this is not all about government intervention and policy advocacy. It is about 85% of that, I suspect, because the internet is important. Freedom of expression and other rights that comes from its use, and it's our ability to create and share information. So again, offering a bit of a reframe in terms of how we step into understanding the problem and moving towards addressing the problem. I'll close with the one comment that sort of stands with me, and this one of our respondents in the survey noted, we live in a rural area that doesn't offer any type of Wi-Fi. This is really a huge problem. It's hard to survive without the internet today. So many companies have gone paperless and fully remote. You know, how do we survive in today's technology-driven world? So with that, I am going to stop talking at you. Hopefully you will hold on to that reframe and those big questions. And we're going to begin to answer those questions by engaging in some conversation. And before we engage in that conversation, I want to bring on our state representative, Natalie Blay, who is going to further challenge us to think forward in a progressive fashion. And so let me introduce our current state representative, Natalie Blay. Natalie represents the 19 communities in the 1st Franklin district, spanning 3 counties and over 500 square miles. Representative Blay proudly represents one of the most rural districts in the Commonwealth. She was sworn into office as the first female representative for the 1st Franklin district in January 2019. She's well known as the advocate on behalf of residents of Western Mass, serving in various public positions. Prior to her role as state representative, she worked for Representative John Over and Jim McGovern for about a decade. I met Natalie, I think in one of those encounters. I suspect
a long time ago, Frank.
And I am excited to have you with us. I think it was in University of Massachusetts office with the chancellor, and we were working on a cooperative project, worker-owner cooperative. Natalie operates a number of relevant committees, and for us, we're really excited that she is on the commission to address the Commonwealth's digital divide, which actually lines up quite well with what we're doing. She's also a vice chair for Joint Committee on Children, Families, Persons with Disabilities. As you will hear in our report, that is a great alignment for populations that are on the wrong side of the divide. She participates House Committee Ways and Means, Joint Committee on Tourism, Arts and Cultural Development, Joint Committee on Transportation, Joint Committee on Ways and Means. Oh, I said that already. So I could probably come up with digital equity connections to all those committees, but I'm not going to try and do that. But I'm going to get out of your way, Natalie, and offer an opportunity for you to introduce your own self to our audience and challenge them to step forward in this new digital civil rights challenge.
Thanks, Frank. It is so good to be here with you today. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm hopeful that we're going to get back to seeing you all in person sometime very soon, but thankfully we do have this option available to us. And we need to make sure that everyone has access, as Frank noted so well. Broadband equity in Western Massachusetts has been a focus and a priority for more than 20 years, if you can believe it. I will never forget standing alongside my former boss, John Olver, back in the early 2000s, outside of the Mass Highway District 2 offices in Northampton. It was a miserable day. There were a handful of state officials and local stakeholders gripping wet shovels in their cold hands. They were anxious to break ground on Mass Broadband 123. This was the middle mile network that promised to finally bring high-speed internet to Western Massachusetts. Back then, the focus was really on securing access to infrastructure. There were over 40 municipalities in Western Massachusetts that only had dial-up, and they were all rural. The efforts led to the creation of the Massachusetts Broadband Institute, or MBI. This was the organization that was charged with solving the digital divide. More than $100 million of federal and state investment, several million dollars of municipal investment, and the active engagement of the legislature, the governor, and residents of the Commonwealth got us to where we are today. But there's still more to be done. All of the unserved municipalities now have a path forward, and there are only a few that have not completed expansion of cable networks or construction of fiber networks. These are enormous accomplishments that should be celebrated. And make no mistake, it is because of the endless, tireless advocacy of the residents of Western Massachusetts, including you. As this progress was being made, more and more urban and suburban communities grew unsatisfied with cable as their only option for broadband. And many of them have constructed municipal networks to provide options to residents and businesses. This includes Greenfield's wireless GSET and Westfield's successful Whip City Fiber. But what's become clear is that the digital divide is no longer an urban or a rural issue. It is a statewide issue. It is a statewide challenge. The COVID-19 pandemic laid bare this fact as families across the Commonwealth struggled to educate children remotely while also working from home. So we must now focus our efforts statewide on creating digital equity, on providing access to affordable devices, enhancing digital literacy, and identifying the remaining pockets across the Commonwealth that still lack access to broadband infrastructure. There is a commitment at the state level to address these needs. During the pandemic, the Mass Broadband Institute deployed Wi-Fi hotspots in unserved communities and in gateway cities. They also implemented Mass Internet Connect, a partnership with the Mass Higher Career Centers across the state. Legislators and state leaders in economic development and the Commissioner of the Department of Telecommunications and Cable are strongly engaged with MBI to continue these efforts and to identify the remaining unserved pockets across the state to ensure digital equity. And as Frank noted, the legislature has created a special commission to investigate equity and access to telecommunications services, including broadband across the Commonwealth. I am so grateful to all of you here today and for the Alliance's efforts to engage with organizations that are actively involved in narrowing this digital divide, because it's going to take all of us to make sure that we are able to identify the solutions that will really make an impact. There are gaps that remain, and your laser focus on the critical links that will ensure equitable access need your advocacy and support. We've done it before, and we're doing it again. I'm especially thankful to you for raising the issue of digital literacy. This is the ability to clearly understand and use information and technology. The word cloud that Frank presented at the beginning showed how important digital literacy is. Filling gaps like this is critical, and connecting and fully engaging our students and our teachers. Increasing digital literacy will help young and old alike access the digital healthcare of our future. It will help our residents return to the workforce in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that digital literacy and access to affordable devices are key to connecting our most vulnerable residents with the services and support that they need. I want to thank you for your commitment over the past year and a half to digital equity and inclusion, as Frank noted at the beginning, and I strongly, strongly agree. This is a human rights, it is a civil rights issue. I love the idea of framing this as a destination. And I want you to know that I stand here today digitally as a partner in your efforts. And I really look forward to seeing what comes of your conversation today and helping with what comes next. Thank you all for everything you're doing and for being here today and being committed to digital equity. Thank you.